We have finished all the feature development. It's great. But are we done? No. If you work in industry, people will tell you that every time you finish develop one class or one method, you have to do something called unit testing. So what is unit testing? A unit test is used to test specific sections of code, where in our case, we can test a method or we can test an entire class. Those will be our unit. When you do unit test, you should really pay attention to unity. That is, the unit you're going to test needs to be small. Testing the entire system is not unit test. That's called integration test or system level test. So in Java development, unit test really means testing each method. So a method is really a good candidate for unit test. Also, when you do unit testing, make sure that you do not have any external dependencies. That means no database connection, no Spring context, and so on. So let me show you what I mean here. Let's say we're going to test unit B. Okay, in this case, unit B can be a class or can be a method. Those are all good candidates for unit test. But B depends on C. So in order to test B, we have to use C. Otherwise, B will not function well. Remember, that's the whole point of dependency, is B needs C service to work right. But that violates unit test, because the whole point of unit test is we only want to test the code you wrote for B. We do not want the quality of C to affect B, because if C has problem, even though my code in B has no problem, B will refuse to work, right? So in unit test, make sure that we're going to take out that dependency. Then you are like, come on, B needs C to work. If I take out C, B cannot work. How do I test? Right? So we have an important concept called mock. We can create a fake or test double for C. So we're not really using C, but we're using a mock that can simulate C's behavior. So we really know the behavior of this test double or this mock. So let me show you what I mean here. Here, I'm going to test artifact service. Okay, every method in this class. So there will be multiple unit tests, right? But remember, artifact service, this class, depends on artifact DAO. So here is the dependency. This guy depends on this, and the controller depends on service. So if I want to test service, I have to use DAO, right? But remember, that violates the purpose of unit test. So we have to create a mock for DAO when I test service. Now, when I want to test controller, I have to create a mock or test double for service. So let me show you how to do it. First, let's test service, and then we're going to test controller. There's no need to test DAO because, in DAO, we extend Spring Framework's functionality. And the Spring Framework is time-tested and is proven, so we do not have to test it. So in this case, we need to test all the methods under these two classes. Okay, so let's work on service first. All right, then how do we create a test case? It's very simple in IntelliJ. You just select this class, option return. Then we can create test. So in this case, we're creating a test class for artifact service. So this is the name of the class, that's the convention. This is the class under test, then we have test after it. And there are many testing libraries they can use. By default, Spring Boot is using JUnit version 5. But you can use version 4, and notice this one is also very popular in industry because JUnit 5 is pretty new, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. Or you can use JUnit 3, of course. And I heard TestNG is also a popular Java JUnit test framework. Okay. Next, we can create this one and this one. We don't need them in this case, but I want to explain what those means. Next, you can select to create test methods for methods under this class to be tested, artifact service. So in this case, we're going to click all of them because each one is a unit, right? then click OK. Then I'm in this class. Where is this? Do you remember in Maven project, under src, there are two directories. Main is where you write your source code, and test is where you put all your test cases. So it is here. Now, before I show test, let me first show you this artifact service. It is under service, right? Okay. Then I'm going to expand test. Well, if you compare this, they have exactly the same structure. So every test class corresponds to every class that you write in this Java directory. Okay, so ideally, for every class you wrote, you should have a corresponding test class. Okay, so we really want the test coverage to be above 70% or 80%. It is very hard to get 100%, but that's ideal. Okay, in this case, we'll only test one. Okay, later on, we're going to test controller. Okay, let me briefly explain what those means. If a method has annotation called addTest, this is annotation from JUnit. So that means this is a test method. Now, add before each means before each test method gets executed, we're going to execute setup first. So usually we have some setup work to do. For example, we populate the list for testing and so on and so forth. And this method gets called after each test method gets called. So next, let's test find all. Okay, I'm only going to show you one, and others you can figure it out. All right, so here are the steps. First, let's add annotation. We're going to use something called Makito. Extend with. Okay, Makito extension dot class. Okay, so we're using two libraries. One is called JUnit. So right now everything is JUnit. Then we can import something called Makito to use mock as test double for the DAO bin. Next, we're going to introduce the class under test, which is artifact service. So this is not very convenient. Let me split my screen into two parts. So let me click this. All right. So this is the class under test, and this is the testing class. All right. So we're going to copy. Let's copy this and paste it in here. So this is dependency, right? And next, we're going to, let me delete this private here. We don't need this private. Then we're going to introduce the class under test, which is artifact service. Let's just call it service. And remember, we do not want to use the real artifact DAO. So I'm going to add an annotation called @mock. As you can see, this mock is from Makito, okay, a second tool. But you have to use this annotation in order to use this mock annotation. All right, so here, this guy is a different annotation. It's called inject mocks. So what I mean here is we're going to inject a mock, okay, a test double into this service because service needs this DAO. All right. Okay, then let's go to find all. We're going to test this method. Remember, when you test, you do not want to use Spring, okay? You don't want to bring up the entire Spring. You only want to use JUnit test. That can make it very fast. So we cannot use H2 database. First, let's create some fake data, and then we can use find all to find them. All right, so let's go to our data initializer. We can copy the code over there. Okay, so let's copy. Well, then copy 2, okay? Copy 2. And then, okay, let's put it here. Let's put it in setup. Okay. Also, here I'm going to define a variable. Let's call it list. Artifact. List. Okay, so in setup, we created two artifacts. And then let's instantiate this list. New array list. and then list dot add artifact 1, list dot add artifact 2. Okay, as you know that this is a private member, so all the methods in this class can share that. All right, so find all. Okay. In find all, we're going to see if service.findAll can really return the 2-element array list that have 2 artifacts. So here's how I do it. When artifact do dot, okay, now by the way, I think I need to import it. Okay, so when is from org.makito.makito.when. Okay, so option return. When artifact do dot find all gets called, then return list. Okay, so let me close this. Does this make sense? Basically, this one defines, so let me make sure I have this. This one defines the behavior of mock object artifact DAO. So that means every time you see this syntax, simply return this list right here. The list that contains 2 artifacts. Okay? Because in service, we're using artifact DAO.findAll, right? So we're telling JUnit, every time you see find all, you just return list. You do not go there and query database. All right, next, let's do an assert equals 2. And here is service dot find all dot size. Okay, this is the unit on the test. We're testing this. Find all dot size. Now in this find all, so let's go into here. In this find all, we're calling artifact do.findAll. But every time you call this, we return you the list and not go into database. That's how we take out the external dependencies. So artifact do.findAll is not really going to find all from database, but it is really returning a predefined list that we defined in the current class. So if everything in this code works, the size should be equal to 2. If it's not, this test case will fail. Okay, next, let's execute this test case. How do we execute? We can simply just click this play button. Okay, so I'm going to click it, run find all. Here, as you can see, the test case passed. 1 of 1 test case passed. So that's how we test find all. Next, I'm going to show you how to test controller. Now remember, the input to controller should be a HTTP request, right? So the testing is a little bit special. So we're going to test the find all in controller. All right, do you remember how to create a test class? You select the name and then option enter, create test, and select all of them. But in this case, I only show you one demo, which is find all. Okay, and those are optional. Click OK. Now, as you can see, under test Java, a controller package is created and is mapping to the controller in my source code. All right. Now, same thing here. We have to introduce mock to mock service because controller depends on service. So at extend with Makito extension dot class. All right. As always, I'm going to split it into 2. So we're going to use this as mock. At mock. Also, we're going to introduce the class on the test, which is artifact controller. This guy here. Let's just call it controller. Okay, and this is inject mocks. So we're going to inject this mock into this controller because controller needs artifact service dot method to work, right? And in this case, we're going to test controller dot find all. Okay, as always, we're going to set up. So let me copy something from the service test. Okay, go here. So let me just copy everything here. From here all the way to this list. Okay. All right. Okay, so in setup, we set up a list that has 2 artifacts. All right, then we can test find all. But this is different, remember. We have to kind of simulate an HTTP request. And also the response or the return value of find all is also different because this find all will return a JSON data, not Java objects. Now, if you remember in service, the find all in service returns a list of Java objects. But this find all, the find all in controller, returns a JSON string. Okay, so how do we test JSON string? The test case is a little bit longer, so I wrote it before. I will copy it here to save some time. So paste. All right, as you can see, if I paste, there are a lot of arrows, right? Okay, we have to import everything one by one. Okay, so now I'm going to close that. We're in controller test. Okay, so this one should be, let's do this. Okay, no problem. I think that's the correct one. Okay, JSON path. That's good. And here is good from Hamcrest. Right, this one. All right, we also need mock MVC. Okay, but before this, okay, copy, paste. This is in static method from here. Okay, we also need mock MVC. So let's go ahead and define it here. Also, in setup, we have to set it up. Go to mock MVC builders dot standalone setup, and here we're going to pass, sorry, here controller dot build. So here is using a design pattern called builder. Okay, so we instantiate mock MVC. All right. Okay, perform is not happy. Okay, then what we can do is let's just throw it. All right, now it's happy. Now, line 62 should be familiar because controller find all is using service find all, right? But we do not want to really use service.find all. So artifact service in this case is a mock. Since it's a mock, we have to predefine its behavior. That is, once service.findAll gets called, you return a predefined list, which is a list that has 2 artifacts. So this is not new. All right, the next one is mock MVC perform. Okay, so this one we're trying to simulate HTTP request artifacts. Okay, and this is a get post. And of course, here we can have post or delete. It really depends on which method gets tested. And this is the endpoint. Okay, and this is the content, which is JSON. That's the return value. Okay, all right, here, expect if find all failed, then this one will also fail. This entire test case will fail. All right, next is $.data. Now, do you remember data is one of the 4 properties in result? Okay, so this is how we access data. okay, and has size 2 because data is really a 2-element array, okay, JSON array. So if you return 3 or return only 1 artifact, then this one will fail, okay, and everything is using and is a logical and. All right, next, for the first artifact in this data array, ID should be this. For the second one, the ID must be this. Okay, for the first one's name, it must be deluminator. The second one's name must be invisibility cloak. So if anything, if any and expect is false, this entire test case fails. Okay, now remember, here is our predefined list. Here's ID name, and of course you can test image URL or description, no problem. But here, for simplicity, I only compared 2 properties in this return JSON array. Okay, let's run it. Okay, so click this play button, run find all. Okay, as you can see, we have find all also passed. Okay, find all also passed. Now, let me just show you something else. If I change it to, let's say, this one, deluminator to deluminate, okay? Just for example, okay, deluminate. And then I'm gonna run again. Now remember, this one will fail, right? Look at here. Okay, now the test fails. All right, so let's look at where I failed. Okay, so it says assertion error. Okay, so this is actual. That is, it really returns deluminator. But in the test case, this is standard, right? So this is, for example, the answer, right? The answer. We're expecting deluminate. It is different from what is actually returned. Then JUnit will fail this test. Okay, and you will find it and fix the problem. Okay, so let's change it back. All right. Okay. So ideally, for each class you wrote, for each method you wrote, well, you don't have to test like getters and setters, those simple ones. But for each method that has some logic in it, you must write a corresponding test case. Okay. Here, the test package will become very, very large. Okay. Now, how do we run all the tests? It's very simple. Here we can do right-click and run all tests. Where right now there are only 2, right? So if I run all tests, okay, it also runs the integration test. All right. Okay, good. So there are 11 tests. They all passed. But remember, okay, so this is interesting here. This one is the integration test. That means we have to bring in the Spring context. Okay, so this is the default one. And those are the tests we defined. Now remember, delete, update, find by ID, save, they're all empty. Of course, they pass, right? But we defined this one and this one. So all the test cases, so 5 here, and 1 here, 11 test cases passed. In some projects, they can have hundreds or thousands of test cases. Okay, but remember, for unit test, it shouldn't take really long to test. Okay, so that's all for the test.